Hello, my name is Jared Kroll, and today I'm going to be talking to you about General Motors. General Motors is an interesting case study for change management. General Motors was a company that started small but grew into a corporate giant. And it was in a golden era for many, many years, being the main car manufacturer in the US. However, this couldn't last. What ended up happening is General Motors' profitability and scale dived deep in the early 2000s. Sales weren't where they needed to be. They were paying too much. Their scope was too large, and they were not able to compete at the international level. They had mass success on the national level in the US, but when companies like Toyota came in that were Japanese manufacturers, they could no longer keep up. And in 2009, General Motors actually filed for bankruptcy. And many of the stakeholders and employees didn't even believe it. But it happened. They filed for bankruptcy. And that was this pinnacle of change needs to happen. This giant can stand no longer. And so what ended up happening is the US government ended up taking control of 60% of General Motors, and the US taxpayers started to pay General Motors out of bankruptcy. And this had to do with a couple things. What led up to this bankruptcy? Why did this happen? One, their scope was too broad. They were making too many vehicles. They had too many plants. They were really focusing in on the big cars that were less effective with gas, and that was not where the global market was going. Toyota was selling primarily smaller cars that had less profit per vehicle, but when more vehicles were sold, the profit went up. Where General Motors was stuck on these big vehicles that had bad gas mileage and where there was higher profit per vehicle. They didn't see the trend and they got left behind. They were also paying their employees, on average, $74 per hour, compared to Toyota, which was $44 an hour. And GM was compelled to run its plants at 80% minimum capacity, whether they needed it or not. They were spending money they did not have. And this painted a picture where they needed to reshape and get new leadership. So that's what happened. They ended up changing things and moving into a new direction. And when this happened, what ended up happening is they scaled way back their scope and their budget. They cut Hummers, the Pontiacs, the Saturns, the Saabs, and they proceeded to mainly produce Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, and GMC. And they also started to pay their employees less, and they scaled back the payouts when employees got laid off or fired. This led to their budget going down. This led to their scope decreasing, which made for a smaller triangle where they could more realistically accomplish their goals. GM also decided they needed to rebrand. They were branding great for America and the US, but they needed to start branding to a global audience. So they started branding for better fuel efficiency, for eco-friendly cars, for smaller cars, and they started honing in on what they knew their audience would need and want. This change was needed, and the biggest mistake that General Motors made is they didn't see this coming. They were behind the ball, where companies like Toyota saw that this change needed to happen and they started building smaller cars, more fuel-efficient cars. GM didn't see that, and it caused them to go bankrupt, and it caused them to almost never exist again. And if it wasn't for America buying 60% of the company and having American taxpayers pay them out of debt, they probably would have gone under. And so if they were to do this again, and if I was to be in their shoes, my eyes and the leadership of them should have been on what is coming next? How can we prepare for this next wave of customers, this next wave of the economy, and how can we be ready for that? Change is always going to need to happen, and it's better to happen before the big shift happens rather than after. That is a big mistake that General Motors made. But because they ended up making the shifts of scaling down budget, scaling back the scope, and having a leadership that saw ahead rather than behind, stayed in the past, that is why they were able to recover and still stay afloat and start to compete with companies like Toyota. Thank you.